Good morning and welcome back to another We Are Sunderland morning briefing. It is Wednesday, the 20th of March. Joe, how you doing?
I'm not so bad, yourself?
Yeah, weather's absolutely terrible yet again. But, we're in the middle of the international break. We can chill, we can relax. There's no Sunderland football to put in a bad mood just yet.
Yeah, it feels that way, doesn't it? I think everyone is quite glad of the break at the moment. Fans, players, staff, probably ourselves a little bit as well, just to take a break from what's been quite a tough period, hasn't it? It's never nice for us to even have to report and comment on losing streaks and when teams are in bad form. So it's always better when it's the opposite way around. So yeah, just a nice break for everyone, I think, just to reset, like what we spoke about the other day, like what Mike Dodd said about the squad as well. Just a chance to really reset and refocus and get going again next week down at Cardiff.
Yeah, there's been plenty sort of discuss, even though it is the middle of the international break. Of course, We Are Sunderland. We do have a competition going on over on our website where you can win one of 3 pairs of hospitality tickets for Sunderland versus Sheffield Wednesday on the final day of the season. Each pair's worth £400. It's just £1 to subscribe, and you can get 6 months worth of content. If you're watching over on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe. It's a massive help for us. Drop a comment. If you're watching now, just drop a couple of comments. If you've got any questions in, we'll try and answer them the best we can. We are really close to 500 subs on YouTube, so it'd be much appreciated if you could drop us a subscribe over there. If I take you back to the start of the week, Joe, it was Sunderland under-21s. There was a number of first teamers playing, and I was there. Were you surprised at all to see how many? I know there were 6, but were you surprised at all to see those names involved?
Not particularly. It's something that they've kind of done quite frequently, certainly this year. Players who've needed minutes or players who've been injured, coming back from injury, they've gone in there and they've got game time, and that's benefited the under-21s as well. I think Ellis Taylor in the piece that I'd written for We Are Sunderland, he referenced that in terms of the crowd coming down as well. There's first team, if there's an incentive there with first team players, maybe if at the start of the season, for example, it might be players that have new signings, that they're getting a run in the side. We saw the likes of Matty going in there, didn't we? This sealed early on this season. It's a chance for fans to go down and see players. Likewise, obviously not on Monday because it was behind closed doors, but at this stage of the season, it's a chance for players to go and see players who might be coming back from injury or players who might not have featured, the likes of Timothy Pembele. We thought he might have played on Saturday. Obviously, Dan Ballard was fit enough to play. But I think for players like Bradley Dack and Corry Evans, it's a key thing for them to be able to do. And it harks back to sort of back in the day, so to speak, doesn't it? We spoke about this the other day, didn't we? Your reserve teams as it was back then. Yeah. If you weren't playing or if you were injured, you'd go and build up your fitness and your form and in the reserves, and then you'd come back and knock on the manager's door and say, look what I've done. So it's a similar pattern to that. Obviously, there's more emphasis nowadays on sort of a development programme and the under-21, the restructuring of that league. 24 teams there now in Premier League 2, and I think European incentive as well for the top half going into next season. But it's still a good thing to do and be able to do for managers and staff to be able to blood experienced players as such around younger players. And I know that there's the caveat of this one, that actually that squad that was on Monday was an older average age than what we saw in the last couple of weeks, which is just sort of classic Sunderland at the moment.
It's mental, that, isn't it? It's absolutely mental.
Yeah. I mean, it's skewed, isn't it, obviously, with Evans and Dack going in there. But at the same time, those are 2 players. Evans been out for, 13, 14 months now. Really key for him to just get to a minute, and that's the way that you do it, by putting him in sort of developmental games like that. Games with, I don't want to say with nothing riding on it, because for players at that level there is, but you know what I mean. It's not a competitive as such as in first team environment. Dack being out since Boxing Day, hamstring injury, good chance for him to build up some fitness as well, because he is certainly one who probably is going to be used over the final 8 games of the season. We've spoke about the striker stuff ad nauseum on the show and before games when we get the team news. You spoke about Job at the weekend, didn't you? I think Dack could be one who throws his name into the ring as well with that, in terms of starting as that sort of false 9, given where we're at with Rooson's injury and Hemia's form and struggles. I think Dack could be someone who might start in there as well. So it was good to see those types of players get minutes under the belt. Obviously, the result didn't go the way that Sunderland would have hoped, but yeah, important minutes for them, no doubt about it.
Yeah, let's do it all again. Let's talk about the strikers yet again. No, seriously though, obviously I was there. I think the main takeaway, there's plenty to talk about. I think what's interesting, as you've touched on there, you've got plenty of first team players playing. It's similar to the old sort of reserve league type thing that they used to do. Interestingly, I know it was under Tony Mowbray when I spoke with Graham Murty, when the first team players, so to speak, did drop down, that was on their own choice, which I found quite interesting. I think it was more, the likes of Leon Diacu last year. He played pretty heavily for the under-21s, just to keep his fitness ticking over. The caveat to that is I don't think he particularly stood out, and obviously when he left in the summer, there was no surprise really. I think if you are a first team player dropping down, you do have to make an impression, and that's maybe something that one or two have struggled with. Certainly one person who didn't struggle, I thought, was Cory Evans. I just think, look, I'm not going to get too carried away. It's 8 games left. He's been out for over a year, but I just thought in that first half, he was head and shoulders. And I know you're playing the 21s. It was a derby. You're playing under 21s. But I just thought that is what Sunderland have missed. Ekwa played slightly further forward alongside him. He's just what they've missed. He's just a seasoned pro, experienced head in that role, and some of the passes he was able to pick, it was actually quite interesting. I didn't think he looked like a player that had been out for over a year. I thought he dictated the play when he could. Interestingly, again, I could be talking about the first team here when I say this, but the efforts that Newcastle had, particularly in the first half, they were from Sunderland's own mistakes. And I mean, you're going to get that when you're playing youth football. As you said, it's all about development. But I thought Cory Evans was just, if they can keep him fit between now and the end of the season, he's going to be massive. We've said that on previous pods, just in terms of, he's an experienced head. It allows for a bit more rotation in midfield. You can rest players, bring players in. There was one or two I was maybe disappointed with. Mason Burstow didn't really have an impact. Again, you're going back to that service. Are they good enough? Yeah, it was a pretty poor outing for him. He does graft a lot, but he doesn't really have a lot of opportunities in the box. Timothy Pembele, I was a bit disappointed with as well. I stood just behind Graham, the under-21s boss, and it feels like, I know they're youth players, but it felt like he had to coach him through the game a lot, to sort of guide his positional awareness. And don't get me wrong, there were one or two bright moments from him. When he's got the ball at his feet, he can take a player on. He's got pace. He was jinking in and out of players, and then he'd get to the edge of the box. And I think there's one instance where there was a cutback, pretty straightforward, and he's blasted it at a Sunderland player. And it's just, I don't know whether that's a lack of confidence, whether it's just where he's at. I think, as we've touched on, that there's a lot of people, younger players who are struggling at the minute. Again, he's someone that we haven't really seen a lot of. I personally didn't think he would play. I thought if Dan Bollard was going to be fit, he would start, and that was the case. But for me, just from what I've seen of him so far, and albeit not a lot, I think his best performance from what I've seen anyway was actually when he came on off the bench at Rotherham, and he gave them a bit of an attacking outlet. I think he's maybe more of a right wing back. Because there was one instance against Newcastle on the 21s where he went on a brilliant sort of rampage and run, and then his sort of tracking back was just sort of like wandering back, and I thought, there was Graham Murty shouting at him to get back. It was just, I don't know.
Yeah, they had concerns though as well if players that are being brought in for the first team, certainly in Belly and Burstow's instance, if they aren't necessarily standing out in the under-21s, like you said. We saw it earlier in the season with Hamir when he was in the under-21s. There was times where he'd go along to Appleton and you wouldn't necessarily think that he's the one that would be really pushing and be the one that would be close to getting into the first team. So that is a bit of a concern. I do agree with you on that Rotherham game, though. He came on alongside Pritchard, didn't he? And both of them sort of impacted the game. I think he created the space, the overload on the right, allowed Pritchard to put the cross in. The main one is obviously Evans, isn't it? He's the one that a lot of people in Ekwa getting the minutes, but he's been regular enough. He's almost a senior player now, even though he's only 22, as frightening as that is to say. But Evans will be the one that people will be looking at and thinking, can he come back into the side realistically to make an impact over the final 8 games of the season.
Yeah, I remember watching Echo when he first came to the club, and he was one who obviously he'd come from under-21s football. He played for Sunderland in the under-21s. And I just thought he's a bit like a Rolls Royce. He didn't seem to get out of sort of first, second gear. He was just... I get how it can sort of be perceived as maybe laziness or a lack of trying, but I just think that's the type of player he is. He's just so calm on the ball. His physical build is really strong. The one issue with that is when you're playing in the Championship, you don't have that much time on the ball. You are under pressure. And again, you know, there was a piece went out this morning on We Are Sunderland just about Mike Dodds' conversations with Pierre and about what he needs to improve. And I found that quite interesting because I think, yes, we haven't seen the best of Pierre Ekwa this season. There was a slight there was glimpses over the Christmas period. But again, if Evans does come back in there, then you'd like to think that Neil and Evans would play slightly further forward.
Probably, yeah. That's been something that's been going on all season, and we spoke about it in January, didn't we? In terms of someone needed to bring in a sort of combative defensive midfielder to counteract that and balance things out a little bit. The Echo one is strange, though, and I go back to what I just said there. He's almost become a senior figure in the dressing room, which is 22. Yeah. He's already played 50 games, over 50 games for the club. He only signed last January. Yeah. It's quite incredible that onus and that expectation has been put on him. This is his first full season in the Championship, and
it's the same with Dan Neil to a degree, isn't it? Like, this is just his second full season of actually starting games and playing, and it's something that I spoke to him about after the game, and obviously you can find that on our socials. But it's something, again, I spoke about needing to protect the youngsters, but that is where they are in terms of, yes, they're relishing that challenge, but at the minute it's a funny one, isn't it?
They're a bit victims of their own success of last year, like Echo towards down the stretch of last season. I mean, if you think of that, the playoff game, for example, at the Stadium of Light, Echo was immense that day. He was instrumental in Sunderland winning that game. So when he's not hitting those levels this season, that's the benchmark that he's setting for himself. Now, he started the season quite well. Obviously, the Southampton game got his first goals and really dominant display that day. The injury seems to have been a big setback. He came back from that, whether he was rushed back or not, I'm not sure. Just given how much Sunderland missed somebody in there, and Tony Mowbray at the time missed that body in there.
Yeah,
I do wonder whether he was rushed back a little bit, and he struggled to get back into form until sort of the end of January, like you said there. We saw against Stoke and Plymouth, he got a couple of goals, and certainly against, I think it was Plymouth, he was particularly good in the second half, wasn't he? So he is one where you think, you know that there's something in there. I think the quote from Mowbray wasn't it, that sometimes you had to give him a bit of a slap in the dressing room before the game. And I almost got that sense from what Mike Dodd said in those quotes today. You know, the conversations that he had with them, you know, sometimes with a young player, you have to sort of have a bit of an honest sit down with them. And they've done that, just about where he's at and his potential, and that it is only potential at the minute.
Yeah.
And it could be really good man management. And then to put him in the 21s as well, you know, be interesting to see how he reacts in whichever game that he will start in over the Easter break, which Dodds was hinting at.
Yeah, I think interestingly as well, if you, aside from the actual first teamers who played there, there's been two players that impressed me there, but one in particular who's been on the fringes of things. And yes, I know there's levels, but Caden Kelly's impressed me. He's a player who's been at that under 21s level. He's obviously he'll be playing for a contract. He's impressed me. He just finds neat pockets of space, and he didn't look out of place playing alongside those first teamers, which I thought was pretty impressive. But another one, he's obviously been injured, Tommy Watson. He came off the bench, and I was really impressed with him in the first sort of FA Youth Cup game I did against Borough at home. Then the second one, I was a little bit disappointed, but he picked up an injury not long after that, and I wonder if he was carrying that in the defeat to Swindon, because he just looked so not off the pace. He just didn't look like his usual self. But I thought when he came on off the bench, I thought, oh, he is a real talent here. And when Sunderland were pushing, obviously they went 3-1 down, when they were pushing for a way back in the game, a lot of the good work came from him down that left-hand side. I think he's ready to start? I know there's been a lot of talk. Maybe not. I think it's a big step up, that, but I would like to see him given some minutes, I think. Just from the bench. I think particularly, look, once Sunderland get 1 or 2 wins,
yeah,
I've spoken about it not being really, or at least Leicester and Southampton, I didn't think was time for experimentation. I feel like you needed the points on the board. But once you have got those points on the board, then I do think it will be time to at least give him an opportunity to showcase what he's got. Because he's another one where there's clubs sniffing around him. And yes, there's a pathway there at the first team, but as we've seen, at Southampton, just naming those youngsters on the bench, yes, you can see it as a pathway to a degree, but are they really going to come off the bench and impact things? I think it was something Michael Beale spoke about, and he's spoken about it at length in a number of interviews. And I think Chris Riggs a good example at the minute, from a Sunderland point of view, is once players get into that first team setup, right, that's not it. That you haven't made it by getting there. It's getting in the team. And Michael Beale, interestingly, did a couple of videos just on Trent Alexander-Arnold when he came through, and he just said it's the mentality that you have. It's not letting that little grit and that desire to get in the first team, which Chris Rigg clearly has. He spoke about him during his time here, but it's not letting that desire and that little fight and that grit to get in the team, and not letting it disappear and be like, look, I've made it. I think that a perfect shining example of that is Dan Neil at Sunderland. He's someone that's right, I'm in the first team, but what can I do to kick on next? And I think you're starting to see he's been one of the standout performers this year, really, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. And if you go back to the end of the League One season when he was taken out of the side,
yeah,
you look at how much that's benefited him, and I think he's spoken about that as well this season and last season. You can probably see a similar trajectory there. We've spoken again about that before with Job. You know, as much as he's sort of taken a little bit of criticism this season, he's probably one of the last of Sunderland's worries at the moment, because you can see from what he's done this season, once he gets that reset and goes into next season, you can probably see him kicking on again. And it could be the same with some of the youngsters. They've been in and around the squad on the bench and things like that. And that is the perfect, that goes back to why it's sometimes ideal to bring some of these first teamers down into the 21s, because it just gives them, certainly someone like a Cory Evans, for example, when you're in the dressing room with him, you can just see the standards that he'll set in there, and the way he goes about his pre-match routines and things like that. That will have a knock-on effect for lads who are really invested in it and, going to want to kick on. Again, I agree with you. Once Sunderland get one, maybe 2 wins, just to ease any of those sort of fears that they could get sucked into a relegation battle down the stretch in the final couple of games of the season, it would be nice to bring some of them off the bench. They've been included a lot this season, quite a few of them. So it would be nice to bring them off. And, the season by that point will be a dead rubber, unfortunately. But that then is a perfect time. There's no pressure on them, in a sense. You come into a game in sort of final 15, 20 minutes and just see what they're about, and in that first team competitive environment in a championship game. So that's something I certainly want to look forward to potentially. But it's very important for Sunderland to get those points on the board first before we can think about that, I think.
Yeah, interestingly, just before sort of wrap up the under-21s talk, because I realise we've been talking quite some length about it. But yeah, I thought Cory Evans again, I know I spoke about what he gives on the pitch, but again, he just, when you're watching him and he talks such a good game of just managing on the pitch where players need to be, that's also a boost for the youngsters. But again, I think there's been talk of Sunderland lacking leadership, and again, just his possible return is going to be huge for the next couple of games. And I think look, they've spoken about him needing the manager's return. I think it's probably still too early to say that he'd start at Cardiff, but I think he'd definitely be in the match day squad for then.
Yeah, you'd like to think so, and it sounds as though we're putting a lot of onus on Cory Evans. There's just there's a little graph here that I'm going to stick on about Evans from last season. So for those of you that are sort of listening, if you want to flick over to YouTube now, but this is just his defensive activity from last season, and this specifically in away games. And I've used away games just because Sunderland's form this season has dropped off a cliff away from home. You can see in the red areas sort of where his defensive activity, where it takes place the most. As you'd expect, they were sort of defensive central areas. And if you compare that with Dan Neil, for example, from this season away from home, you can see that is slightly over towards the left a little bit more and out of those central areas. Likewise, I'll put Pierre Ekwes on now as well from this season, right out here over to the right. That to me, again, I know there's a lot of mitigating circumstances there, different season, and you can argue, as we have done, that Neil and Ekwes are different players, but just Evans is back on there. you can see the areas where he is really taking up defensive activity, and sort of that is exactly what Sunderland have missed this season. There's no doubt about it. We've said it with them two in there. Yes, they're good players, technically good players, but just that sort of leadership and that defensive nous in that area of the field above sort of screening the two centre-backs, like you can see there from Evans in what did he play, 23 games last season? They've missed that so much. I don't know if that's something that you'd share.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think as well, just one of those caveats is obviously the formations that you play, because Sunderland have played a flat three at times, a two as an anchor, which maybe plays into why Neil and Ekwa are slightly more lopsided. But again, it's that central sort of linchpin area of the pitch. I think sometimes when you watch Neil and Ekwa, I mean, it's not a huge cause for concern, don't get me wrong, but you often find sometimes they're just a little bit on their toes of one another. And I don't feel like you get a lot of play going through the phases. I feel like a lot of it is generally, out wide, and you don't really, I think part of that as well is not having a designated number 10 on the pitch. And I know you've done a bit on Adil Aouchiche. Do you think that's an area that he sort of needs to, I don't know, come into his own's not the word, but do you think that's an area he can make his own?
He's got to. He's got to, really. Yeah. That he's been brought in as another one earmarked to be someone who can kick the club on, and he certainly showed that at youth level. He was excellent sort of under 16, under 17, under 18 level when he was at PSG and in the French squad. Second in the Golden Boy for the World Cup under 17 level in 2019. So there's definitely potential there, and you can see why Sunderland invested in him, even just based off that. I think back at that time, you had clubs like Arsenal after him as well. So there's obviously something there. It's been difficult for him. He's another one where it's been a difficult transition moving over into the Northeast and acclimatising to the Championship. I thought it was interesting that Mike Dodds, again, he spoke about the Pierre Ekwa conversation. I feel as though there was a similar conversation I had with Adil Aouchiche, where he said that we've got him in a bit of a better place at the moment in terms of his application and his concentration. That just tells me that perhaps some of these lads have come into the squad, and I don't want to say underestimated the demands of what it's like in the Championship compared to over in League One, but that he hasn't stood up enough. That was only his fifth start at the weekend. Someone who's coming in, that Sunderland obviously invested quite a bit of time in trying to get over the line last summer as well. That's something that he needs to be able to kick on and prove that he can be that player who can fill that spot. I do think he looked better as the 10. We've seen him shuffled around quite a bit. He's even gone as the forward at times or out wide. I do think he looked better as the 10. First half, he was the one. Look, it was a poor performance throughout on Saturday, but he was probably the one, if you thought something was going to happen, it was probably going to come through him. Yeah. There was one where I think he either won the free kick on the edge of the box or went out for a corner where he picked the ball up off Hamir, kind of bounced off him on the halfway line, and he really drove right through the centre of the field towards the edge of the box. Sunderland haven't had that for a while. That's something that they missed, and hopefully that'll come and that'll continue to grow with them. Only 1 goal, 1 assist. Those numbers need to be better for someone who's going to be playing in that position. And, it's up to him now to really make that position his own, because with Alex Pritchard going out the door in January, it's his to make his own now as well. And if that's not going to be the case, then that's something, again, that Sunderland might have to address in the summer. Yeah,
I'd just completely echo everything you've just said. I mean, on a slight side note, have you seen the boots he's shared on Instagram, the bright orange Nike boots? And talk about adapting to the Northeast. I think he's certainly done that there in that sense. Just before we sort of move things on, obviously we are Sunderland in partnership with the Farm Museum and Cost Specs Opticians. If you are watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, that like button, drop a comment. And if you've got any questions, get in touch and we'll answer them. Obviously moving things on, I know there's been talk and suggestions of the ownership selling up. I think that is just that at the moment, isn't it? It's just talk. You've seen that multi-million-pound investment that they've just committed to in the last couple of days. For all the talk, obviously, on the pitch, and, questioning the model, the recruitment, that's a big statement of intent, isn't it, behind the scenes?
Yeah, it is. And I think it's something that's been needed, and fans are quite pleased to see that has happened. You're not speaking out of term to say that the stadium has needed a bit of a makeover in recent years. How old are we now? 25, 26 years in. have been there, and so it has needed a little bit of a facelift. So this sort of regeneration into it will be welcome. Obviously, the safe standing will be interesting to see how that goes down next season. We've seen it work in plenty of other grounds now, so it'll be quite good. I'm quite looking forward to seeing what that'll be like in the Roker end next season. Another 1,000 in the away end, I think. So that suggests that it's going to be the away end's going to stay up in the north upper stand as well. But no, those are things that have been needed, and at least something where you can say, as you say, that the fans can look at and think, oh well, at least that the club are investing in infrastructure and things like that. Obviously, they want to see it on the pitch. I think a lot would say, okay, well, we'll pass up the PA system if we can bring a striker in who's going to score 10 goals or whatever. But it's nice for these sort of things to be going on in the background and to get done over the summer. And I think you would like to think that wouldn't happen if there was any sort of contentions about the ownership looking to move on. That certainly says that they're here to invest in the club, on and off the field.
Yeah, there was plenty of Charlie Methven PA memes flying about on social media the other day. Just to sort of carry that on a bit, I think I've spoken again about sort of open channels of communication from the club with supporters, obviously after the Black Cats bar debacle. I think they're obviously set to hold another meeting with the Red and White Army supporters group, and they've been part of, or they will be part of the, the walk around the stadium and areas for improvement. And I think that that's good that they are being sort of held account, because again, I think there's Sunderland fans have been promised many things in the past and haven't necessarily always been, fulfilled these promises. So again, that's. Do I think it's a step to repairing the relationship? Yes. Is it going to? Look, I mean, everyone makes mistakes. It was a pretty big mistake, the Black Cats bar debacle. But again, it's just making sure that these are fulfilled and these promises are sort of acted upon.
Yeah, they have to. I mean, the Black Cats bar thing, that for me, that'll probably be something that'll take a long, long time for supporters to get over, truly, because of, just because of what that meant and the game that it was surrounded with. It's gone now. There's not a lot the club can do about other than do things like this. Like I say, I do think that'll take time. That is a trust that was severely broken in that instance, and that kind of just surrounded everything that was going on at the club at the time, didn't it? Obviously, Tony Mowbray's exit, Michael Beale's appointment, drop of form, everything that went about with the derby was, as we've spoken about at length, it'll take a lot of time for that to go under the bridge with some supporters. So the only thing you can do is do things like this, and it is important to get groups on board, because then at least you're getting the flavour and the feeling of what supporters are actually wanting, rather than either neglecting things or going out on a whim that might not be what supporters want. It is a step in the right direction. Obviously, they need to take a lot more than just that as well.
Yeah, and this isn't a slight on supporters here, but the atmospheres at home games have felt pretty flat. And I noticed that they spoke about wanting to improve the supporter experience. I'm not making out that that's going to get supporters jumping off the seats, but at least when you've got a ground that you want to go to, it helps. Obviously, results on the pitch dictate the general mood around the place. Let's not beat around the bush. But again, it's following up on these and making sure that these promises you deliver upon them. Just before we move things on again, obviously you spoke to Mike Dodds just about what the general plan is for this week. Obviously they played the under-21s game. What did he sort of say after that?
Yeah, well, it was just going to be a case of, as we saw, a handful of them going into the under-21s game, and then they did review the game from Saturday. They didn't want to change the principles too much just because they've got a break. So they'll have reviewed that either yesterday or on Monday themselves. The first team will have gone in and look back at what went wrong really against QPR, because across the board, again, it was sort of said that was the worst performance under his tenure. And it's hard to disagree, even though they got a point out of it, because it was so flat, given the opposition. Speaking about the crowd then, again, this is nothing on the crowd at all, but the entire afternoon was just flat. Fans need something to get going. There's nothing on the pitch at the minute to get them going. And that'll be why they were reviewing that. I'll get my words out. Beyond that, just a couple of days off for them, and then sort of looking at a full week again going into Cardiff. It is shortened with it being on Good Friday, but I think the reset, as we said on Monday's show, that break for for everyone is just what's going to be needed in this period, these couple of days where they'll be going away, spending time with the families and just getting away, maybe even from the northeast for some of them, just a couple of days away from the Academy of Light. And because it is a constant, isn't it? It's a constant pressure and it's a constant demand, even when there's not a game on. If you're going in there into that workspace all the time, if things aren't going well, it's tough. It's tough in any job, in any environment. It's heightened in this situation because of the expectations on the club. So just to get away from that, you hope that it's going to do them a world of good. And obviously with getting some of those players back who could feature, even if they're just in the squad, what a boost it would be just to have Cory Evans in the squad on Good Friday, even if he's not going to play, just to have him in the squad. Because I think it was Michael Beale who spoke about it, wasn't it? He said, it's good to have those players around, but as a player in that situation, they sometimes feel a bit unwanted or out of place if they're not getting kitted up on a match day. Just to have them around the dressing room, they can feel a bit like a spare part. At least if he's then going to even go out and do the warm-up or something like that, it just feels as though he's getting closer and closer and more of a part of it rather than just being there for the sake of being there, if that makes sense. Really important couple of days for them just to take away from the situation off the back of the 21s, those who've played, and then regroup and go again probably from Monday.
Yeah, all good. And we'll draw a line under things there. Again, we are Sunderland. You can subscribe. It's just £1 for 6 months. We'll be releasing our full interview with Stephen Aziz to subscribers on Friday. So you can find that on the website. Obviously, watch the link over there rather than it landing on YouTube. But we'll be back with you on Monday next week. Thanks for joining us. We've been in partnership with the Farm Museum and Cospex Opticians.